Christian, you need to tell us about what is going on with Venezuela. You have Donald Trump threatening war with Venezuela, reportedly giving dictator Nicolas Maduro an ultimatum to step back from his arguably illicit presidency. Why is this happening and why right now?
Well, if you take a step back, this is all about President Trump's war on drugs and his overriding immigration agenda. Those go hand in hand, but over the past 4 months, we've seen a massive buildup in American military power in the Caribbean. This is led, of course, by the USS Gerald Ford, an aircraft carrier, and its full complementary strike group, along with some 15,000 Marines. This is way more boots, not on the ground, but in the region than the U.S. has ever had in the Caribbean. Now, of course, those follows multiple strikes on alleged narco-terrorist drug runners, both in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. And furthermore, last week, over Thanksgiving, President Trump warned the world that Venezuelan airspace should be considered closed. Now, what does this necessarily mean? It sounds like the president is going to escalate this campaign against Maduro, whether that will involve a full-on ground invasion, potential strikes against land targets, which he did tell me about a month and a half ago that he was personally reviewing and considering, but still keeping his options open. And look, this is ultimately the largest buildup of American military power and personnel with a clear aim, at least in my mind, on starting a new war since the invasion of Iraq, some 24 years ago. And I think what's important here, Tiana, is that, Donald Trump says he is a peacetime president. He's ended some, half dozen wars. Again, the president says it's even more. So what I want to know is, how is his base reacting to this news, especially the isolationist wing of the quote-unquote MAGA coalition?
I found it oddly muted. You would expect there to be more outrage if you consider what happened in the summer when Trump, in about 30 minutes of American military presence in Iranian airspace, used 14 bunker-busting bombs to unilaterally take out Iran's nuclear weapons capability, set it back at least a decade, right? We had a giant faction revolt, say Trump was going to start World War III. We were going to risk American lives. Not one American boot went on the ground. World War III was not started. And
well, we don't know yet. No,
I guess we don't know yet, almost half a year in. But seriously, it was probably the largest revolt I've seen against Trump within the right. And it was over nothing. In the end, Trump was completely correct. It was the correct call. Obviously, I supported it at the time. But in hindsight, I think an honest broker would have to admit it was about as surgical a military operation as you could possibly want. Not too many questions with this legal legitimacy. Everything regarding the Venezuela question is a little bit murkier, right?
Without a doubt.
Because it's unclear what military presence means, right? Does this mean they have, 10 sites that they want to strike because these are the sites that are creating all the fentanyl? You do it, these are enemy combatants, and leave? That's not necessarily what it seems like, and it just seems incredibly muted. We'll get into a moment about specifically Pete Hegseth coming under fire for alleged war crimes, but it's important to note that Trump, even by designating Agua and all these drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, that is not the same thing as designating them as active enemy combatants with authorized military force.
That's
right? This really is supposed to be up to Congress to determine. And, as usual, Congress throws their hands up in the air. For those of us who are hawks and realists, you could see the fact that, Maduro's economy, communism, has failed, and you have Maduro hosting large numbers of proxies from Iran, China, Russia, the Chinese and the Iranians really mostly controlling Venezuela's state-ran oil company. So altogether, you have the axis of evil with large control over OPEC+. Saudi Arabia really is like our big friend, but even they can't necessarily overcome Venezuela, China, Russia, Iran, when you think that Venezuela has the largest single reserve of crude oil on the planet. And prices still matter in the Trump administration. You know, a lot of us conservatives should learn at this point that Trump has been pretty much right with all major foreign policy calls in the end, right? It usually takes a couple of vicissitudes to get there, but the major calls he makes, historically speaking, have been right. The Soleimani strike, the Iran nuclear strike, all of that. But it remains to be seen. One area where we can maybe get a preview of what the MO is what's going on with Pete Hegseth.
Yeah.
So Defense Secretary / as he calls himself, Secretary of War, he has been accused of war crimes over a September case where you had a boat with 11 accused Trinidad Agua members. They strike the boat. There are 2 survivors in the water. The second strike is what is in question because WAPO says Hegseth authorized the second strike in violation of, military law, in violation of international law, because at that point, these are non-enemy combatants. And then you have, conservative commentators like Andy McCarthy, who are very much MAGA, saying the entire initial strike wasn't even legal because, again, we tend to handle drug traffickers under criminal code, not as acts of war. So Hegseth, after, similarly, some vicissitudes in getting there, is now saying this wasn't him. Donald Trump saying this wasn't him. The implication being someone else made the call to do the second strike. What is going on? Is Hegseth's job safe? Why was this second strike made? What can this tell us about what Trump's broader, what he deigns to do in the region?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Pete Hegseth's job is certainly not safe, and it's probably the hottest seat he's been on in these first 11 plus months of the Trump administration 2.0. And let me explain to you why. You had mentioned that the president said that Hegseth didn't order that second strike. I believe WAPO quoted Hegseth from an unnamed source in the room saying, "Kill them all," directly. On Air Force One, traveling back from Mar-a-Lago on Sunday night, the president kind of distanced himself from that, right? He said, "I don't know anything about it." It's very, very different from his usual way of combating quote-unquote fake news spin from the media, saying it's a full-on, witch hunt. You guys are just out to get us. He literally said, "I don't know anything about it."
And that he
said,
wouldn't have wanted a second strike.
He did say that.
Trump said that he personally would not have wanted a second strike.
So Trump's words there alone, he loves rallying the troops and protecting his lieutenants from, again, attacks from the fake news media. But this was very different, and it caught a lot of reporters' eyes and ears on the plane. I think the other thing you have to think about here, Donald Trump is willing to forgive all types of incompetence or gross negligence as long as you remain loyal, which Pete Hegseth certainly is, and you don't create new headaches for the president through your bumblings and trying to pursue the actual responsibilities of your office. If you remember, before Thanksgiving, there was this big video that was put out by a bunch of Democratic lawmakers, including Senator Mark Kelly, basically urging enlisted military members to not follow orders that are illegal because they have a higher duty, reporting to the Constitution and to America than, again, to a president who is ordering them to act illegally. We should note that this alleged second strike, where Hegseth allegedly said, "Kill them all," would violate the Geneva Conventions. You are not allowed to kill unarmed combatants. Full stop. That would be an illegal order. And therefore, the Trump administration's defense against that previous video, in that all of the president's military directives have been by the book. We've been consulting the White House counsel. We've been informing Congress about what our plans are. That kind of goes out the window if this is proven to be true. I think when you look at someone like Pete Hegseth, and I'd even lump in Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Kristi Noem, RFK Jr. is a little bit different, so we're going to put him to the side for a little while. All of these figures in the Trump administration, I think, could be viewed as the potential fall guys, right?
Yeah.
The president, we know, conducts policy in a much different way than virtually all of his predecessors, even himself in his first term in office, in that he is making all of these decisions, more or less, and these cabinet secretaries or FBI director, and Director Patel's case, they're kind of just supposed to be social media stars, right? They're out there, doing Fox hits, owning the libs on Twitter or X.com or whatever it's called these days. And, they are there to be a sacrificial lamb for President Trump to cut loose when things get really wrong. I'm not saying Pete Hegseth is going to be fired tomorrow. I am not saying that, Pete Hegseth will stay on for another 3 years. But what I do think is, as we're on the precipice, again, of a potential war with Venezuela, the last thing you want is the head of the Department of War, Department of Defense, Pentagon, whatever you want to call it, doing exactly what Democrats are saying the Trump administration is doing, ordering illegal military action and therefore giving enlisted military members free rein to ignore those directives. Again, when you're about to invade another country on another continent, which even members of your own party are sort of digging your heels in and saying, I don't know if this is a good idea.
Hegseth and the administration at large, they could have the very real defense of, this was someone below Hegseth that made this call. Right? So it was Joint Special Ops Command. You could have one of these JSOC commanders underneath Hegseth. It could, there could just be the plausible deniability of Trump or Hegseth saying, won't someone rid me of this meddlesome priest? But I didn't actually ask you to kill the guys in the water, right? At the end of the day, I don't know how much of this actually matters, if only because Pandora's box has already been ripped open. And I would expect every one of Trump's cabinet members to get the Uncle Joe special of a categorical, unconditional pardon for anything they've done over the last 4 years.
We're running out of time, but I do want to ask you one more question. So are we buying the Trump administration's line that this is only about stopping the flow of fentanyl and other drugs through the southern border or through ports of entry in South Florida or other places? Or do you think there's something else at play here? Do you think the president, who, let's be honest, has been getting crushed when it comes to affordability, but does have one singular lifeline at the moment, gas prices, that the White House continues to point to as dropping significantly compared to the previous year, even though I'm pretty sure the national average is actually up, and I think your home state of California might have something to do with that.
Yes. So overall energy prices have been favorable, right?
Yeah.
Like that's one of the big part of the basket of what Trump has been really successful at. And it's also part that, like, I think we all understand the president is much more responsible for energy prices because that involves so much federal regulation, drilling permits, all that, much more so than, lower level service prices, right?
Or the price of eggs at the grocery store.
Which have come down, mercifully, right? We all saw that over Thanksgiving. So, look, I don't think we actually invaded Iraq over oil, but we did invade Kuwait for oil. Like,
Sure.
I don't think there are many people that are going to fight me on that. So, like, we've done military action for less. The question is, what will Trump do it for, right?
Yeah.
And again, you can spin the national security justification it's very rare that you have a national security justification as cut and dry as the Iran strike, where you have a regime that sponsors proxies whose mottos are death to America on the cusp of having a nuclear weapon. Like, that is a pretty clear, like, humanitarian, global national security justification. In this case, it's a little more murky. Again, the presence of these Russian proxies, that provides a way bigger case, right? Because remember, Russia doesn't operate in a vacuum. Its ability to hold out in this war against Ukraine, or its war on Ukraine, is not just in isolation. It is thanks to its ties in global finance, and part of that is the Maduro regime, which again sits atop largest global crude reserves. So, is it about gas prices and affordability? Maybe. Probably, cynically speaking, because national gasoline prices really, from peak to trough, haven't actually budged since December. But if you're communist whose economic policy is such a failure, you can't even run a state-ran company, that you have to bring in the Russians and the Chinese to help you manage it, don't be surprised when the U.S. invokes, Monroe Doctrine, specifically the Roosevelt corollary, to say, this is our job and we're taking it over. We can't have you this close to the Panama Canal. We can't have you sitting on our oil. And foreign policy really doesn't move elections or public opinion unless it blows up as catastrophically as Biden's did, a la, the visual cues of the planes leaving Kabul. But gas prices do win elections.
Yeah, I have one more quick point to add on that, and I think there is a sentiment within the president's circle that a war with Venezuela would be so easily won that Republicans could, in fact, get a sort of wartime polling bump heading into the midterm elections. But I mean, you said it yourself, the Iran strike, that was super contentious at the time. And 6 months passed, no harm, no foul.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone on the right has forgotten about it. I think those same types of folks would be willing to forgive Trump if he came in and knocked off Maduro in 2 weeks or so. And then you've got these American oil companies coming in and taking advantage of the existing infrastructure and driving down the price of gasoline at home even more.
I think Christian might have memed me into supporting war in Venezuela.
That's my one hope and dream.